Now, for a bit of forgotten Glasgow history here on the show, did you know that the village of Grahamston vanished beneath the foundations of Glasgow Central Station over 100 years ago?
I didn't, but its memory lives on in buildings, in street patterns and not least in the urban legend of the abandoned village beneath the platforms of Scotland's busiest railway station. Earlier we explored the area with Noddy Gilland, with the author of Glasgow's Forgotten Village.
This, as most people will recognise, is the front entrance to Glasgow Central Station, with something like 30 million passengers and so many other people passing through it every year. But it's got a far more interesting story to tell than that. This is where the village of Grahamston stood from around 1680, a mere huddle of cottages in a vast landscape of countryside, cornfields and market gardens. Well, I'm Noddy Gilland. I'm the author of a book called Glasgow's Forgotten Village, which is the story of Grahamston, which stood here from about 1680 until it was demolished to make way for Central Station. By the time it grew to about 1870, it had become a very important commercial centre for Glasgow, and then it was demolished and the businesses and the people were moved out. Everyone thinks that there's this urban myth that there's a village in the basement, which of course is nonsense. But there are two buildings that still stand. One is the Grand Arms Hotel in Argyle Street, and the other one is what's now the Rennie Mackintosh Hotel, used to be Duncan's Hotel. The only other remaining original Grahamston building is the Grand Arms here on Argyle Street. It was built in 1804 on the site of an old maltman's cottage, or what we'd probably call a microbrewery today. And as we walk under the station bridge here, the Helaman's umbrella, this is where the foot of Alston Street came out. So Alston Street would have run from roughly where the toilet sign is here in the building to this other sign, the Dawding sign up there. So roughly these two shop units, and it ran straight through from here right through to Gordon Street. We're looking north up Mitchell Street, just off Argyle Street. And you might notice it's a very, very crooked thoroughfare. It doesn't seem to have any real rhyme or reason to it. And that's because it follows the line of the old Glasgow Burn, or the St Enoch Burn, which was the western boundary of Glasgow when Grahamston was developing. So Grahamston was outside Glasgow at the time. And it gave this very odd shape to the street, and even this building here, which in fact, if you look at it, is built on the lines of an old farmhouse that stood here at one time. And that was the western boundary of Glasgow, so anything this side of it was outside Glasgow. So Grahamston was quite distinct from Glasgow at that time. The building on the other side of Union Street, with the hotel sign on it, is one of only two original Grahamston buildings still standing. It was built in 1802 as a tenement dwelling house and then converted to a hotel, at the Duncan's Hotel, and it's now the Rennie Mackintosh. So something like the early 1800s, when the boundary became Union Street, and then eventually the boundary moved again. It was actually demolished in two stages. The first stage was to demolish from Union Street westwards towards Hope Street to allow for the initial station to be built. But it was soon found out that the station was inadequate for the number of passengers using it, and it was decided to extend it over to Hope Street, and that meant demolishing the buildings on Hope Street on the east side and right across the rest of the area. I would imagine that few of them would have very little, any kind of rights. They would be mostly tenants. Even the businesses would be tenants, I would think. I would imagine they'd just be given notice and have to leave, move to other parts of the city or move out of the city completely. The closest you'll get to underground Grahamston is here at the Alston Barn Beef, which sits underneath the platforms and the arches. So here we are, literally underneath Central Station, underneath the concourse, and this whole area would have been demolished and dug out to build these arches that hold up the concourse and of course the railway platforms further down. And above us, of course, originally would have been Alston Street, running right down to Argyle Street. But isn't it interesting that just over 100 years ago, people would talk about living and working in Grahamston, Glasgow, and yet it's been almost surgically erased from the public consciousness.
And Noddy Gilland, who you just saw in that video, and the author of Glasgow's Forgotten Village, joins us now. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, for those of us who use Central Station every day, there's a village underneath it then?
No, there's not. It's a very attractive story, but unfortunately it's completely untrue. In fact, there even was a myth at one time that when people moved out of Grahamston, that somebody left a hoard of silver that they just forgot to take with them. So you can imagine how unlikely that is, and there's as much a chance of a village under Central Station as there is of the Loch Ness Monster. In fact, I think that's a better bet, to be honest.
So disappointing. I was hoping for
Banishing
that.
all the myths there, Norrie. Getting rid of them all in a winner. So can you tell us a bit more about the decision then to actually demolish Grahamston as it was and build Central Station?
Yeah, well, it was largely down to intense rivalry between the two main railway companies who were vying to bring the railways into central Glasgow, trying to beat each other to do that. And there was a lot of other land speculation going on as people were buying up land in the speculation and the hope that they would make a profit from it. And then the plans would change and they would sell it on, and then new land had to be bought. And this went on for many, many years. And in fact, really, it was partly due to the failure of the local authorities and the government to actually stop that happening. And there were two or three alternative plans for a station. There was one that should have been built between where St Enoch ended up and Central ended up, so halfway between those two. Okay. And there was also a very large vacant site on Waterloo Street where they could have built the station, but none of those plans went through, and we ended up with Central where it is, and Grahamston had to be knocked down to allow for that.
Oh goodness. So what was actually knocked down then? Was it like houses? Was there churches? Yeah. What was actually taken away?
There was houses. There was a large church called St Columba's on Hope Street, and it was demolished. They demolished an old sugar refinery. They demolished all sorts of houses. The offices of the Glasgow Gaslight Company. They might even have had a gas installation there, I'm not sure. So they just wiped away everything basically between Union Street over to Hope Street.
Wow. When we think of that area just now, you'd find it hard to believe that there actually was a village, a small village in that, what is a relatively small area. How many people lived in that area roughly at the time?
It started off with just a handful of people around about 1680, and it gradually grew to about 1870 when there was about 1,000 people living there, and also 400 businesses.
In that one area?
Yeah, in that one area.
So what was the reaction once it was decided that it was going to be demolished? Were the people of Glasgow, they must have been up in arms about it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know very much about that, but I know that there were various protests to government and so on, so that would probably be people protesting through their elected representatives. But when it came to actually moving people out of Grahamston, they would have very few rights. So they would almost all be tenants, and that would even include the small businesses. And I imagine they would just be given notice to leave. Simple as that.
No say in the matter, just get out and go.
So difficult.
Yeah, and the story of Grahamston, I suppose, shows Glasgow's journey to an international city to what we have today. But do many Glaswegians know that village once stood there?
Not very many at all. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I researched and wrote the book. I would imagine that less than 5% of people in Glasgow know anything about Grahamston, which is very odd considering it wasn't some far-flung part of the city. It was right in the heart of the city centre, and it's just been completely forgotten about.
How was it something that you came across? Is it something you've always known about, or when did you discover it?
I came across it in a book, and I don't even remember the name of the book, and it was in a map in the inside page of the book, and it just showed this little area called Grahamston back in the mid-1700s, I think. And that just intrigued me. I just thought that was amazing, and I started to research it. It took about 4 years on and off, just part-time researching it, and then I eventually published the book.
Fantastic. Just captures your imagination.
And it's great that you've done that, because we wouldn't have known about it and we were able to talk about it in the show. It's a great story. And if we walk around that area today, we will see 2 Grahamston buildings still standing.
Yeah, that's right. The first one is the building that's now the Rennie Mackintosh Hotel on Union Street. That was formerly Duncan's Hotel, and it was originally built. It's the first building on that site. It was built in 1802 as tenement dwelling houses, and then converted to Duncan's Hotel, and it's now the Rennie Mackintosh Hotel. And if you go round the corner, just before you go underneath the Haleman's umbrella, the railway bridge, there's the Grant Arms, and it's a second generation building there. It was built in 1804 on the site of an old maltman's cottage, what we would probably call a microbrewery nowadays.
It's a fascinating story, and Norrie, we will get you back on to talk about it some more and find out a little bit more, because it's a great piece of Glasgow history.
It really is.
Norrie, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.